All right, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I know it's a late night. We're kind of reaching the tail end of the program here. So we're going to kind of take a shift in terms of the ideas because, we're going to enter Shabbat today. Rabbi Burnham's going to give a little bit of an intro to Shabbat to appreciate kind of what it means to a Jew. I want to talk about a little bit of a different subject. The topic is putting passion to practice, which is a really important subject, I think, especially concerning a program like this, is that there's a lot of inspiration, right? Anybody's talking, there's a lot of positive energy that is going around here. A lot of great ideas, a lot of new concepts, a lot of life-changing perspectives, right? And I think as much as we feel inspired about that, also there's a sense of being overwhelmed, right? Because it's like, oh my God, I never knew all this stuff. And the question really is how am I realistically going to do this, right? How am I really going to implement this? I mean, it seems to make sense. The logic is there, but the reality is we don't live on a campus in Arizona in the middle of nowhere with low cell phone reception and having people wake us up in the morning for prayers, right?
That's my dream.
Anybody? So I mean, this is really a little bit of a utopia, but I think everybody appreciates the value of this environment is it kind of removes us from that world so that we can perceive the world and perspective without the distractions. But the real question is going to be is how do we implement real change in our lives when we go back to that world? So let's start with that discussion. So I guess I could ask the question like this. How many people in this room have something about themselves that they've wanted to always change or improve, right? You don't have to be shy, right? If you don't put your hand up, you're a liar. Right? No, I'm kidding. But what I mean to say is that, well, let me ask you this question. How many people have actually successfully changed that thing about themselves, right? Or have implemented, right? So you'll have a little bit less hands going up. So I think really the notion of change in our society and what people and what society allows or wants us to believe is that people think that change comes when I become inspired, right? People would say if I only was inspired enough, if I only got excited enough about my diet, about how important it is to make my relationship work with my spouse, with my children, if only I got that real impassioned feeling about how bad it is to smoke, to drink, then I would really change those bad habits, right? If only I was so inspired, then everything would change about my life. And I think that that's a big mistake that we make in thinking that inspiration is what motivates and creates change. Inspiration is very temporary in nature, right? Inspiration lasts, and just as fast as it comes, it goes. And if we have the notion that inspiration is what's going to carry us through the next week, next month, next couple of years of our life, then we're making a big mistake. We're basically hanging our hats on something which is very temporary in nature, right? If anything, it's actually a double-edged sword, because if we wait for inspiration to motivate change, then there's actually a danger to inspiration, because let's ask the scenario. Let's say I get really inspired about something, and I'm like, yes, I want to do this, I'm so excited about this idea. And then nothing happens as a result of that inspiration, right? What level of inspiration are you going to need next time in order to be able to actually get that same motivation, right? Imagine we have an inspirational moment, nothing happens as a result of it. Next time we come to that same speech, that same talk, what are we going to do? We're going to shut down. We're going to say, no, I heard this already. And then we're going to have to up the dose of inspiration, right? And so you can actually have this people that are engaged in Judaism. And what we do is that we really are just jumping from class to class to class to class because we keep getting this inspirational high. And we're hoping that something is going to do it and just really push me to get that change. But you realize we're really putting ourselves in a really difficult situation, I hate to draw the analogy, but sometimes when a person is smoking a certain drug to get high, eventually it wears out, so you need a little bit of a higher dose. Judaism and religion is no different than that. If we think that change comes from the inspiration, then we're setting ourselves up for a really difficult reality, right? So how do we do that? How do we make that change? Nachmanides, the Ramban, he has a very interesting insight into how a person can keep change and keep inspiration alive in his life. I'm not going to get into the verse, but he basically says that if you want to keep your inspiration alive in your life, you have to take that inspiration, that moment of emotional high, you have to grab it with your hands, you have to quantify it, and you have to put it in a jar and close the jar. That's what he says. He says you have to put it in an object. What does that mean? So the explanation of the Ramban is that if you want inspiration to last, your inspiration needs to translate into something practical. If I get inspired about a certain idea, immediately take that inspiration and implement it into a behavior, into a lifestyle. Because when you do that, then you're guaranteed, you're putting an anchor in the ground and you're saying, that inspiration has motivated this behavior, and this behavior is something which I can implement within my life. That is a very key aspect to change. A key aspect to change is to take inspiration and then put it into something practical. That, if I can say something that I said was the most important idea of the talk, that was it. Now I'm going to talk about methodologies. From a Torah perspective, the insight into human nature, with some added benefit of modern research in the psychology of human change. So let's talk about this. So let's talk about taking inspiration. So let's say let's take an example. We heard a great idea, right? Let's say I really love the concept of Shabbat, right? Shabbat is like this utopian bliss that exists every weekend. I don't have the distractions of the world. And then I'm thinking in my mind, oh my God, it's impossible, right? I don't have the people around me that understand it. People are going to think I'm crazy. Socially, I'm going to be an outcast, right? So all of the questions come into our mind, and then we become so overwhelmed with the thought that we're like, all right, it's a good idea, but it just doesn't seem realistic. So let's talk about the practicalities of implementation. And here is the first fallacy of American advertising. What do we read when we drive down the street? We see huge billboards. I'm going to say the sentence and you're going to finish it, right? The sentence says, get rich.
Or die trying.
What?
Quick.
Quick. Yeah, that was funny. But think about this. Lose weight. What's the last word? Fast. Lose weight in 30 days or your money back. One of my favorite ones is right, like lose 30 pounds in 30 days and live to tell somebody about it, right? Fix your marriage with 3 easy program installments. Having difficulty with your children? Here's a practical methodology that in 1 week we guarantee the behavior of your child will be adjusted. In our society, the belief system is that successful change has to happen immediate and it has to be intense. Think about the advent of extreme exercise, right? If you ask medical physicians, people that are physical therapists, they will tell you that to have a good workout does not require you to be almost half dead by the time the workout is over. But as Americans, we're led into this notion that if I'm almost dead, if I'm killing myself to the point where I'm like, I'm still breathing, then we believe it was successful. And that is a very wrong notion. You know, I listened to a TED Talk once and he was talking about, I forgot what the subject was, but he said a really good line. He says, think about what we have in the most important parts of our life, right? It's not dating anymore. What is it? It's speed dating, right? We don't dial anymore, we have speed dial. It's not reading anymore, we speed read. We take audiobooks and we listen to them in fast forward because we just want everything, we want it right now and we want it to change our life. And that is a huge, huge problem. Because when we try to force something too big, it becomes difficult for us to actually implement it. So why do we fail with this? I want to talk to you about a fascinating passage in the Talmud. The Talmud says the following. It says that Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, who was the greatest Jewish leader, he is the actual compiler of the Mishnah. The Mishnah predates the Talmud. The Mishnah was the first written text of the oral tradition. So you can imagine the giant this person was. The Talmud has the following, records the following incident. It says that Rebbe was once, he used to engage in conversation with Antoninus. Antoninus, I believe, was a Roman general. Is that right? I asked Victor for that stuff, right? Antoninus was a Roman general. And they used to have these interesting philosophical discussions. So Antoninus asks Rebbe, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. He asks him, he says, at what point in time does the evil inclination enter a human being? The desire to do evil, to do bad. At what age does it enter? So they had this argument. So Rebbe looks at Antoninus and he says, it enters a person already when he's in the womb of his mother. Antoninus looks at Rebbe and he says, I completely disagree with you. I believe that the evil inclination enters a person only after he has exited the womb of his mother. And he gives the following logic. He says, because if the evil inclination would enter a child while he was still in the womb of his mother, the desire for that child to become free and not be constrained because he has the desire to be free and unlimited would effectively force him to kick himself in his mother's womb to his own demise, to force himself to try to exit. So says Rebbe back to Antoninus, amazing admittance of truth. He looks at it and he says, your logic is sound, and therefore I agree with you. It must be that the evil inclination enters a person only after he has exited the womb. And so you see a fascinating insight into human nature is that we as human beings never want to be forced into something that we don't want. We don't want to be forced. We want to be autonomous, right? We talked about this the other day, about the natural desire of a person is to be able to decide freely how he chooses his life. And any time somebody tries to force us, we immediately reject it, right? How many times, be honest, how many times have we been in arguments with people and defended a position purely because we were being challenged, even though we didn't necessarily believe in it? Right? All the time. When someone insults us, then all of a sudden we take the position of anything which is contrary to the other person. Because we as human beings by nature do not want to be forced into anything. And so if you think about that reality, and then think about how the world tells us to change the most fundamental aspects of our life, our relationships, our health, our education system, and they tell us that we have to do it immediate, it has to be fast and powerful, then we're setting ourselves up for disaster. Because when you force an emotion, you force a change on a person, the greater the intensity of that force, the greater the force of rejection that will parallel it. One of the most fascinating examples of this is research done on this concept of forced rejection of emotional concepts. It's actually called the ironic process. And you'll understand why it's called ironic. So let's do a thought experiment, right? So if I tell everybody in this room, for the next 10 seconds, do not think about a white polar bear. Okay? Let's start. Was anybody successful in not thinking about a white polar bear?
I thought about a black polar bear.
Smart.
You planted an idea.
But actually, I'll tell you, the fascinating research is that when a person is told not to think about a white polar bear, you will actually think about it more than if I told you to think about a white polar bear. That's fascinating. Rabbi Dessler was a great Jewish philosopher and writer who lived in Europe about 150 years ago. He said the same thing about prayer. He says a lot of times you're in the middle of the Shemona Esrei, the Amidah, right? He says, and then a thought comes into your mind which is distracted to your connection to God. So he says, often you'll find that the mere fact that you start forcing those thoughts out of your mind are precisely the reasons why you will not have any concentration throughout the entirety of your prayer. So he has an interesting suggestion. He says, when the thoughts come, look at them and say, hi, I know you're there. I'm not going to fight you. And then just continue with your prayer service. And then they will actually dissipate. And so this reality of trying to force a change has a diametrically opposed phenomenon, which is rejection of our humanness and our ability to want to be free and choose things that are of interest to ourselves. So how are we supposed to do this? If this is the reality of our humanness, that we don't want change, we don't want to do different things differently than what our base natures are interested in, so then how do we change? How do we take an idea? How does a person, right, hear a great idea at heritage retreats, right? And naturally, because we're not adapt to that behavior, we have a natural rejection to it. So now we're just immediately thinking, yeah, I want this, but emotionally, I don't. And if we know that if I try to force it, it's going to reject us, so then we're setting ourselves up for failure, right? You see the challenge that we're faced with as human beings in terms of trying to grow? So I'm going to talk about a couple practical methods. And I think if you listen carefully to them, we can really find some unbelievable keys that can help us implement these ideas, right? So the first two ideas are very practical in nature. The first idea is that if we understand that emotionally we reject the scenarios of forced change, then the first and most simplest methodology is to avoid the situations which force the emotion, right? I'm going to give a very practical, crude example, but then you can apply this in a lot of different scenarios. So let's say a person has a problem of overeating, right? And what's the problem of overeating? We take, our wives or our mothers or our significant others are great cooks. And usually we're hungry when it comes to mealtime. What do? We pack that plate, right? Just like I see what we do upstairs. We pack it in. So it's like a mountain plate in front of us. And now we are forced with the dilemma. Oh my God, if I eat this whole thing, I'm going to become a lot fatter. So what do? Now we have an interest. I don't want to eat this. My desire says, eat. So what do? We are forced in this scenario. As we're finishing the plate, we've got like a quarter of the plate left, and we're like, should I eat it? Should I not? Should I eat it? Should I not? Very difficult situation. A person with very strong will be able to overcome the desire to eat the green eggs and just pick up the plate and put it into the trash, right? Very difficult. What can a person do to make that challenge a lot easier? Justin?
Leftovers.
Leftovers. That's a good idea. Okay. I'm talking about finding ways to avoid the conflict. An idea?
Put on less food initially.
Put on less food initially, but that's harder.
Use a smaller plate.
Fantastic. Use a smaller plate. Use a smaller plate. You're going to naturally fill less food into that plate, so you're naturally going to eat less. This is not my idea. It's a fascinating idea that they found. It's one of the greatest movements in the diet movement is that you can diet best when you don't even diet. Just make your plate smaller and you will easily lose a lot of weight. Throw out all of your dishes and have salad dishes in your house. And then you will become a skinnier person without even trying. Isn't that a brilliant insight? Avoid the scenarios that cause us to challenge ourselves in ways that we don't want. And so if we think about it in a practical situation in terms of our Judaism, so that what we have to do is we know there are certain places, certain people, certain times that are much more challenging to us. And they challenge the basic tenets of our belief system and things that we would rather not want to do. So either we can put ourselves in that scenario, right? I love the example, right? The kid's going out with the bad friends. So he says, Ma, don't worry about me. I'm going to be just fine. But little do we understand the power of social pressure in terms of forcing us to comply with what the group is saying and doing. So what's an easy way to avoid that? Avoid the situation where you're going to have to make compromising choices. Avoid the places where people choose to have relationships in ways that are below your standards of how you engage people, right? Find an excuse. Find a way to avoid those situations, right? Person wants to start trying to keep kosher more, right? He knows that all of his friends and everyone, most of them are not even Jewish, and they like to go out to eat. So you're saying don't have a social life? And no, so what we do is that's too intense for us. So we go out, and then everyone's ordering the shrimp pork steak, right? And then you're like, oh God, how do I do this? It's way too difficult, right? And even if you order a small plate, it's still not kosher, right? So how do we do that? So think about an intelligent way of avoiding that. I heard a great idea. You know what it is? Have a huge meal before you go out. Stuff yourself with like whatever you can find in your fridge. So then when you're sitting there at the table and then the menu comes to you and you're like, wow, I usually would be so hungry I cannot overcome this temptation. You'll be like, wow, I'm full. I don't mind just having like a Coke or like finding something that doesn't have a question about its kosherness. Isn't that an amazing idea? So we can continue socially, but we find a practical way of avoiding the emotional intensity. Or try to get people to come to places. If you live in the East Coast or the West Coast, there's many kosher restaurants that are very high caliber. So a person should find restaurants that are practically going to be in line with what they want to do. So the first question, so I can't give every example here because I'm not in your lives. We all have different lives and the different scenarios. But the first key, if we understand that our emotions naturally force us out of what we want psychologically and mentally, then the first key is just to avoid the scenarios that cause us to make those compromises. Does that make sense, everybody? Okay, so think about yourself. Think about over the next day or so about the different environments which compromise our better judgment, and think about how can I better protect myself instead of throwing myself into into that challenge. You know, they say that desire is like a huge ferocious monster, terribly ferocious monster. He's got like 8 arms, and he's got like 15 fangs and like 16 eyeballs, and he's furious, and he's gross, and he's terrible. He's gonna kill you, right? There's only one thing about this monster that you can save yourself from him. This monster has no legs. And as long as you keep your distance, you can smile and laugh in the face of danger, right? But what do? Oh, such a cute monster. What nice fangs you have, Mr. Monster. I love your furry hair, right? Oh, don't worry, he's tame. He really likes me. Oh, look, he's purring, right? Next thing, swallows your head whole, right? So we are often at fault of putting ourselves in those situations because we get close to the monster. Avoid the monster and you avoid a lot of challenging circumstances. So that's the first point that our rabbis teach us in terms of a person overcoming this reality of our humanness. Okay, second very important point. The first one is avoiding the situations we don't want. The second one is putting ourselves in environments that socially we will act according to what we believe we should be believing, right? Put yourself around people that follow and espouse the moral standards or the religious standards that you wish to have for yourself. Because social pressure can be a negative power, but it can also be a tremendously positive motivator. Because when people are doing something around you, you naturally gravitate. Let me ask you, how many people on this program have found it much easier to do certain practices of their Judaism that normally they would find it very difficult to do because of their surroundings, right? You don't have to put your hand up, but I think it's obvious because the environment allows for it. And so we don't feel the social pressure of being different, which is one of the most fundamental aspects of our humanness, again, is that we always want to fit in with the people around us. I could talk for hours on the powers of social pressure. It's one of my favorite subjects in Jewish thought and psychology. But suffice to say is that being in the positive environment has a great effect. And I want to give you an amazing example of this. This to me was the most powerful I've ever come across, is the power of positive environment. It's from a book called Switch, which is the psychology of change. I would recommend everybody read it. I would recommend reading all of their books, the Heath brothers. And he brings the following scenario. He says that in the Vietnam War, narcotic use was very, very prevalent. People were really getting high all the time. They were smoking these crazy drugs more than they ever did when they lived back in America. And they found that of all of the people that were trying the narcotics, 20% were clinically addicted. Clinically addicted. So you have 20% of the US Army off in Vietnam now addicted to narcotics. And this was a huge crisis because the US government realized that we're about to have hundreds of thousands of men reintegrate back into American society as completely addicted drug users. And they're like, we don't have enough rehab centers. We don't have enough workers that can help this epidemic. And basically, their hands were down because they had no idea how to deal with such an overwhelmingly powerful problem. Imagine, it was the downfall of American society because many capable working men were now going to be addicted drug users. And this is amazing. 1 year after all of these men came back from Vietnam, they found that the prevalence of narcotic addiction had dropped from 20%, I wrote it down, to I think 2% or even 1%. It was almost negligible, the amount of narcotic use after. And this was a huge, really strange thing that happened. The US government didn't spend $1 in trying to fix this problem, and yet they found that people who are drug addicts now immediately had no problem. And they're like, what happened here? This is the greatest medical miracle in history. And you know what they found? They found a very fascinating insight in social environments. So you have this guy coming back from Vietnam, right? Everybody's doing the narcotics there. He's addicted. Now all of a sudden he comes home, and he's got a wife, and he's got kids, and he's got friends. So he takes the syringe out, and he's about to shoot up, and all of a sudden he gets that glaring look from his wife. And all of his kids are looking at him. Daddy, what are you doing? And then his friend's like, dude, what's this all about? The power of social pressure took people who were drug addicts and basically wiped away their addiction without anybody even trying to intervene. So if we believe the power of environment can help us positively change, then all you gotta do is find people that espouse the same ideologies that you do. Now again, I'm not saying close your mind. I'm not saying that. That's wrong. I think as intellectually sound people, we should always be looking for ideas to grow and change. All I'm talking about is the social pressure, the environments that challenge our moral standards. It becomes a lot more difficult if we're not around people that have the same ideologies, right? One great example is if, like, again, talk about Shabbat or kosher, whatever it is. Shabbat is a lot more difficult to keep when you're around people that have no concept of it and just think you're a wacko, right? As opposed to finding opportunities to invite yourself to someone's home for Shabbat. Then all of a sudden, it's so easy. It's so much more pleasant, and you enjoy it so much more, right? So find opportunities to put yourself in an environment of people doing that activity, and all of a sudden you've made the challenge a lot less difficult, right? So the first two examples we've just given are, don't challenge the emotional rejection that we have as human beings, but rather find opportunities to circumvent it. The first one is to avoid the situation, and the second one is put yourself in a diametrically opposed power of social pressure that will now allow you to overcome that base challenge that you have inherently, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, now let's go to the approach that the Torah Judaism says about how to challenge head on. Right? So we talked about avoiding, but you can't always avoid. Sometimes you're going to be forced in a scenario where you have to actually challenge that part of your nature if you want to become, if you want to change something or integrate a new behavior into your life. So it starts with the following. Rabbi Shlomo Wolbe, who lived, I think he passed away maybe 10 years ago. He was one of the great Jewish philosophers of our time. He lived in Israel. He's a brilliant writer. He has a lot of great books about human nature and insight from a very strong Torah perspective. And he writes the following story that happened to him. He says that once he was traveling, he was flying in Israel, and as he was flying, he noticed that when the plane was getting close to the Egyptian border, all of a sudden the airplane took like a nosedive. A nosedive. Like, we understand when the airplane just does a little bit like this, like we get like a little scared. But the airplane actually just like really dipped down. And he says that they got so close to the ground and then they leveled off that he could look out the window and he could see the houses and the cars very close by. And it was a very strange thing that happened to him. And then once they passed, the airplane re-elevated to its normal height. And then it continued flying. And he was very concerned. Like, nobody explained in the PA what they were doing. So after the flight's over, he walks over to the captain of the flight and he says, "Can you please explain to me what in the world the plane was doing when it dipped down?" And the pilot tells him the following. He says that we just had one of the wars in Israel. I forgot which one it was. And the Egyptians are monitoring our air flight. But we, because we're the intelligent Israeli army, have discovered that there's a certain threshold for where their radars pick up airplanes. And it's above a certain height. So when we get to the Egyptian border, what we do is we actually dip down, we fly below the radar until we're successfully out of their airspace, and then we re-elevate. Says Rabbi Wolbe, this is the insight about how to challenge ourselves head on. You know how you do it? You know how you fight your emotions? You don't. You take the battle, and then you fly right below it. You take the challenge head on, and then you cut it in half, and half, and half, and half, and you make it significantly smaller below the threshold of the natural rejection. Now, I'm talking very esoteric, because what the heck is he talking about? I'm going to give you a lot of practical examples of this. Basically, it says, do things small. Find small behaviors that are associated with the larger behavior that you'd like to implement at some point in your life, but start small. Because when you start small in doing something, it becomes a lot easier to deal with it because you're not rejecting it, right? So if we think about some of the practical examples of this, right? So again, I'm just coming to those examples because, we hear about Judaism. How many commandments are there, right? A good Jew should follow how many? 613. Oh my God. Now I got 613 commandments to follow? You think I'm ever going to be able to walk out of here and then just follow it? I don't even know the vast majority of what these commandments are. It's so overwhelming. It's so powerful. It's so rejecting. So what do? Fly below the radar, which means just remove a lot of them. I'm not saying that it's permissible. I'm telling you it's the only way. It's the only practical way of doing it. Is find a few of the commandments, of the mitzvot, that you feel are integral and core, and then just say, I'm going to work on just these few small, 2 or 3, right? 613, no. To be, let's say, in behavior, to conduct yourself in a way that's going to make you a lot propelled forward, think about it. Tefillin, right? A good example of it. It doesn't mean I'm going to pray the whole morning prayer service. It doesn't mean I'm praying 3 times a day, even though that's what we should do, right? As good Jews. It says, though, I know I want to get there, but if I try that too fast, too hard right now, I know I'm not going to be able to do it because it's going to be too powerful. The rejection will be too strong. So what do? Instead of saying pray the whole day and do the whole tefillah, barely can read Hebrew, you know what I'll do? I'll take 5 minutes in the morning, I'll put my tefillin on, I'll say the Shema, and then I'll go into my day. Do I brush my teeth? Yeah, it takes 3 minutes to do it. Do we even think about it? No, because the behavior has become part of our routine. Taking something small, making it into your routine, it's almost like no rejection. Because we're not taking a whole bite at once. We're finding a very small aspect of something which is important to us, which is prayer and connecting, and doing it with a very holy article that we've had, and then saying, I can put my tefillin on, I can say my Shema, and then I can go into my day. Who knows where that will lead me? I can't give all the examples. I've always said, you know how long does it take a person to become majority keeping kosher? How long do you think it takes a person, right? Give me some ideas.
3 years.
3 years?
5 years.
5 years? Anybody? Majority kosher.
21 days.
What does that
21 days.
What does that mean? 90 days.
Like significantly more kosher than you are today.
If you keep it 21 straight days, you will keep it.
Okay, so 21 days. I think it takes...
Not 20?
If you do something for 21 straight days.
I think it takes exactly... You guys ready for this?
I'm listening.
I think it takes exactly 5 seconds. And you think I'm crazy. I'm not crazy. You know why it takes 5 seconds? Because kosher has become a business in the United States. To the extent where you have kosher professionals going to every factory that produces food, and they're going through those factories and telling them, hey, if you change this one ingredient, your food will be kosher. And if you pay us a little bit of money to oversee that, you will actually open yourself to a significantly larger market. And it makes sense financially for you to do this, because what benefit do you have of using this product versus this one? And so it's a business incentive for companies to do that, to the extent where, this is going to shock you, that every single supermarket that you walk into, I would say 70 to 75% of all of the products are actually kosher. So why does it take 5 seconds to become significantly more kosher than you are now? Because when you're walking down the aisle with the shopping cart, instead of just saying, oh, I like that, putting it in. Take 3 more seconds and then just find the one with the kosher symbol and put it in. Simple behavior, immediate benefit. I bet you if you go into your homes right now, you will find that probably 50 to 60% of the products in your cupboards are actually kosher. So you're actually already significantly there. Now, again, the cost of meat is expensive. I'm not pretending to say that it's going to answer the question. But see, a small behavior with a little bit of effort, we can find simple ways to do a lot more about what we're doing. Do you see how that's a lot easier? It's very practical. There used to be a trip that they did on this program that they take everybody to the local supermarket, and they actually have everyone go through the aisles. And shocking to them about how much of the supermarket is actually kosher. Like how much of the products are kosher now. So again, a practical methodology, which is not biting off the whole thing at once, but it's finding a very practical way of implementing an important idea into your lifestyle and diet, right? Okay, so that's the first step. The first step is don't take things on too strongly. Is that still recording? Okay, still recording. Don't take things on too big. Cut it down and cut it down. In secular world, there are these concepts called New Year's resolutions, right? And everybody, right, they have statistics about how many of them actually peter, out within the first few days. In Judaism, we also have something like that. It happens on Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, there's a concept of accepting upon yourself new traits and behaviors that you hadn't been doing in the past that you want to improve on. So one of the great Jewish thinkers said, okay, when you get that idea, whatever it is that you're thinking you want to do or implement that year, take that idea and then cut it in half. And then take that half and cut it in half again. Now you probably have something that you can do. Take the change that we want and make it small and make it practical. And you'll find that it'll be much easier to implement because now we're not challenging ourselves too much. We're not pushing against ourselves too hard. Now again, don't get me wrong, there are unique individuals that have the strength of character that if they see an idea that they want, that they love, that they're passionate about, that they can actually fight and implement it much larger. I've seen people go kosher because they were so passionate about it, they went all the way. But I don't know if the majority of people can do that, and only you individually can know where your threshold is. Where is too much, where is too little, I have no idea. But each one of us are going to have to test that. Sometimes you'll fail, sometimes you'll see it was too much, sometimes you'll see, well, I'm fooling myself, this is way too little, I should do a little bit more, right? So again, it's going to be kind of a trial and error process for all of us. Okay, step 2, okay, so we got about 15 minutes left, so we'll try to cover this. Do you mind passing my bag, because my battery's just kind of weakening out on here. My iPad goes down, my brain goes down. Okay. All right, so what's the next step here? By the way, great purchase, everybody.
What is that?
It's a battery pack. Okay. Okay, so the first step is make it small. Second step is make that small change and make it consistent. So even if we do decide, we've cut it down in half and half, and now I think I could do this, instead of keeping Shabbat every week, I'm thinking maybe once a month. Instead of keeping the whole Shabbat all at once, I think I could start keeping half of a Shabbat. I know this sounds crazy because we're always taught that, a lot of people think it's like, who am I faking? God knows that you're supposed to do the whole thing, and who am I fooling to say I'm only going to do half? That's a big mistake. That's also part of your Yetzer Hara. Because God wants change, and He knows that we're human beings, and He knows that we're challenged. So find opportunities to do it. Half is good. Half is very good, right? Imagine a person who's an alcoholic, right? And they drank half the amount that they usually do. Would you say, oh, what a waste of time? No, that's a real change. That's a life-altering change. Oh, he's not sober yet? Again, I'm not, we just have to find the examples of implementation. Even if it's small, it's still relevant. Now, consistency. Let's talk about Jewish concept of implementation of behavior in terms of its consistency. So, Maimonides, the Rambam, has the following interesting debate. Not a debate, but a discussion in his commentary on the Mishnah. And he asks the following. He says, a person who wants to develop the trait of generosity. So he says, I'll pose it as a question. Which of the two actions do you think would be more effective in developing the trait of generosity? Imagine I have a $100 bill, and I see one poor man who's in desperate need of $100 to be able to get a medical need for himself taken care of. And that's $100, that's a lot of money, but I only have one $100 bill. Or, imagine a different scenario, that I have 100 $1 bills. And then I see 100 people pass by me, and I give them $1. Maybe they could buy a soda, not really going to do much for them. Which of those two behaviors, actions, will actually have a more powerful effect in making a person into a more generous person? Anybody have ideas?
The stack.
The stack? Okay. I like reasons behind the argument.
Because what the person is experiences, he feels like he's giving 100 times as opposed to just giving once. Even though the amounts are the same, he feels like he's impacting more people just by
But it's only $1. It's not doing much of an impact.
Yeah, but it's a lot of small steps.
But
Okay.
it was a hobby.
Does anybody disagree or agree with that?
Say it again.
I agree with him.
Say the question again?
Yeah.
The question is if I want to become more of a generous person, will I be more effective in developing that trait by doing a strong, dramatic act of philanthropy, or doing a lot of small acts that are not as significant? Small? Anybody argue on that? Okay, well you guys are good. Says Maimonides, the great Jewish philosopher who was versed in all of Torah knowledge, says that it's much more powerful to develop the trait of generosity when you implement the behavior of generosity over and over and over again. Dramatics are great, but like we said, strong emotion, it comes, but it also goes. Doing the action of, yes, here you go, yes, here you go, yes, here you go, 100 times, even though it's small, says the Maimonides, you will actually become a more generous person when you find the ways of doing an act of generosity smaller. So now we're finding that not only is small, a practical way of implementing, it's actually a more powerful method of implementing a thought or an idea. The book of the Sefer HaChinuch, which is an anonymous book written a couple hundred years ago, he actually talks about, much before modern research in behavioral psychology, which says that if you want a behavior, if you want to implement something into your life, do the behavior, and that will motivate your cognition, right? Behavioralists go with behavior motivates cognition, and then the cognitive psychology say that thoughts motivate cognition, that if I think a certain way, I will feel a certain way. So then there's now a movement called behavioral psychology, and they put them both together, which is cognitive behavioral psychology, and they put those two. It's the most powerful method in human psychology, to the extent where if you can do it, they found that it's more powerful than antidepressant drugs for a person to implement a behavior and have the cognitive thought process, which are healthy for a healthy person. And that's a very basic tenet to Judaism, is that we talk about the mind being engaged, but also the behavior. We are not philosophers. Our religion is not just a religion of philosophy and ideologies. Our religion is a religion of behavior. And a lot of people have a problem with that. They say, why do we have so much action? Why are there so many mitzvot, commandments, so many base physical acts? Those things create a barrier between me and God. Because I just want to connect, man. I just want to feel spiritual. I just want to have the psychedelic movement and just be there with no behavior, no activity. Say the sages, the true implementation of beliefs comes when there's a behavior associated to that belief. And therefore Judaism says, think about going out of Egypt, but do an action of putting on your tefillin, which serves as a reminder. Think about connecting to God by remembering doing His mitzvot, and also put the tzitzit on your body. You see that physical action is a reinforcement of a cognitive belief system that actually will motivate more belief and ideology, close to the ideology that you have. And so it's a very powerful method of implementation. I want to just mention one of the most, I always say this is the most amazing study I ever heard, but there's a lot of great research done on these subjects. One of my most favorite is, it was a study done by Jonathan Friedman and Scott Fraser in Stanford University. And what they did, I think I mentioned this to somebody, a group of researchers went to Palo Alto, California. And what they wanted to do is that what they did, they went to a very posh neighborhood. They knocked randomly on doors of people in a certain area. And they asked them the following question. They said, people are driving very fast up and down our streets. Could you do us a favor and volunteer your lawn for us to put a huge sign that's 3 feet by 4 feet in the middle of your lawn? We'll dig the hole and we'll put it in that says, please drive slowly in our neighborhood. Would you volunteer your lawn to do that? What do you think the vast majority of people said? No. I'm sorry, not today, right? Come back when my husband is home, right? 87%, I think it was 83% passed on the opportunity, which is surprising that 17% actually complied. But put that to the side. But you see significant majority of the people would not agree to do something. Now, do they believe that it's bad to drive fast in the neighborhood? Yes, they do. They don't disagree with the concept. They just think that that's too dramatic for them to agree to. Now listen to this. 2 weeks before, they went to another neighborhood in Palo Alto, California. So similar demographic of people. They knocked on their doors and they asked them a slightly different question. They said, people are driving very fast in our neighborhood. Would you volunteer to take this postcard that says, please drive slowly in our neighborhood, and put it in the window of your house or on the dashboard of your car? What do you think compliance was there? It was I remember, it was 95%. Why did people agree to do that? Because it was easy. It was small. No sweat off my back. I'm not digging a hole, and I don't have this obstruction in the middle of my property. And so the majority of people agreed to do it. Now listen to this, gentlemen. 2 weeks later, they went back to the postcard group. They knocked on their doors a second time. And they said, ladies and gentlemen, we're just not being effective enough in our push to get people to drive more slowly. Would you volunteer to up your effort to help us and agree to have a sign, which is 3 feet by 4 feet, implanted in the middle of your lawn, which says drive slowly in our neighborhood? What do you think was compliance then? 76% compliance. What in the world is going on here, gentlemen? In the first group that was never asked anything other than put the big sign on your lawn, 83% said, not happening. When they went to the same group of people 2 weeks before and they asked them put a postcard in your window of your car or your house, compliance went up to 76%. That is a dramatic shift in doing something you don't want, that's too dramatic, that's too big. What was the only difference?
Baby steps.
That's right. And they've discovered when you do something small that follows a belief system that you have and that you like, guess what? The action motivates stronger commitment and investment to that very idea. And so when you put the postcard in the window, guess what? 2 weeks later, you're ready to do something even more powerful, even more significant. And that's very important. Because here I am talking about doing small things, making small changes, it motivates behavior, all of that jazz, right? But how's that going to make me do the big thing? So I'm going to become acclimated to doing the tefillin thing every day, fine. But what about prayer? What about the longer purpose of it? What about connecting in all those deep facets that we described here? Fine, that's okay. You'll get there at some point. But you're not ready for it. But when am I ever going to get there? You know what? Find a small behavior which is consistent with that belief. And guess what? Down the road, you might find yourself a lot more interested and engaged in that process. One of the most brilliant insights I was ever given was from my rabbi. My rabbi once told me, I think I mentioned this to somebody. I wasn't married yet. I was post high school and I was in the yeshiva, and I had these great anxieties about what my future is going to be. You know, what college, university program should I take? When should I leave the yeshiva? Where should I live? All questions that were totally irrelevant to my immediate time and space because I didn't have to make those decisions at that point in time. I just wanted to have the comfort of mind to know where I would be at that point in time. And he looks at me and he says, amazing insight. He says to me the following. He says, let me ask you, does it make sense for a 16-year-old to tell a 25-year-old what to do with his life? Does it make sense? Most people would say, no, not really. I mean, he might have a smart idea. But he would say, you'd never do that because a 25-year-old has a lot more life experience and overcame difficulties than a 16-year-old. And the perspective the 25-year-old is going to have is probably better suited for the reality of the 25-year-old. And so he looks at me and he says, why are you going to make decisions for your future self when you are now here? Who's to say that then you're not going to see things differently and be able to make a better decision based on your circumstance? And that was amazing insight to me because he was basically saying don't sell yourself short because of decisions and commitments that you're putting yourself into now when it's not relevant to make that decision. A lot of people, and this is a genuine concern, a lot of people think, I like the Judaism thing, I like the perspectives, I like the ideas, I like the direction, I'm going to do the behaviors, I'm going to do them small, I'm going to do them consistent, but what the heck? I don't like the end product so much. I don't really see myself like those Jews, those Orthodox. It's just weird. I don't think I can be like that. So I like it, I know how to do it, but at the end of the day, when I project my future self and I look at that person, I'm like, I just don't see that happening. What's the answer to that? The answer to that is very simple. Who's to say you're going to think the same way you do after, in the future, than what you do now? All we need to be is open to new experiences, to new ideas. Live in the present and let life take you where it can. How many people in this room had one very strong idea about a certain philosophy about their life, only to find that 2 or 3 years later they see the world from the exact opposite perspective? Right? Now, if you would have gone back to yourself 5 years ago and you started arguing what you believe now, you think you would have listened? No, you wouldn't have. But you see that the mind can develop. Like we say, if behavior can motivate cognition and beliefs, like a little postcard can motivate a stronger commitment to a value of driving slowly, then yes, it's very likely that by doing small and consistent actions, we might actually be more in line with the idea. So I just want to finish with 2 small points. We're going to be done in about 2 minutes. My clock's a little bit fast, so I still got 2 minutes. Or maybe my watch is slow. But by the way, the Jewish people, when they received the Torah from Mount Sinai, they said the most powerful phrase in Jewish history. When God said, "Do you want this Torah?" the Jewish people said, "Na'aseh v'nishma." We will do it, and we will hear it. And all the commentaries say, what does that mean, we will do it, and then we will hear it? You have to hear something in order to be able to do it. But they said, we will do the behavior, and then we will hear it. Na'aseh, we will do it, v'nishma, and then we will hear. Says Rabbi Wolbe, what was the depth of the insight that the Jewish people had at the time? Here they were being now introduced to this Torah, which is very different than the lives that they had been leading until that point in time. The insight that they had was a great psychological breakthrough, and they said, Na'aseh, we will start doing what you tell us. Then nishma, then we will hear it. Then we will appreciate it. Then we will understand it more. Right? That's this idea that if you commit to something small, you will actually become more open and more aware of the realities that can have an implementation on your life. If we go into life thinking, when I get it all clear, when everything makes sense, when I have every question answered, then I'll do it. Well, you might be waiting quite a long time till anything actually becomes relevant or practical within this ideology. And recognize that the action itself can motivate thought and can motivate interest. That's the idea. So I'll end with the following. There's a great psychology blog called spring.org or PSY blog. And he has a lot of great research, modern research, and he dumbs it down into layman's terms so people like me can read it. And they did a fascinating study trying to understand how long does it actually take for a person to implement a new behavior that they want, like a good habit, right? How long does it take for a good habit, right?
3 weeks.
So they didn't know. Everyone has their ideas, right? How long does it take? So we can have plenty of ideas. So they actually put it to the rigor of research. So they took 96 people in the University of London College. This was published in the European Journal of Social Psychology. And what they did is that they were interested in forming a new habit. People were interested in forming a new habit, such as eating a piece of fruit with their lunch, or doing 15-minute run each day, or drinking more water daily. And they wanted to know, how long does it take for a person to do a habit that it becomes second nature, that they don't even have to think about it anymore? Great idea, right? So they had people actually write in their journals every day, from 1 to 10, when they did that activity, how difficult it was, how much natural strain did their body reject it, and then they wanted to see how that will dissipate over time and how long it will take. And this is amazing. So the study was 84 days long. So when the researchers examined the different habits, many of the participants showed a curved relationship between practice and atomicity of form as depicted below, and there's actually a graph I could show anyone. So on average, so listen to this, on average a plateau in automaticity, meaning it becomes habitual to me that I don't even have to think about it. It's so easy, right? For me, it's easy. Like most of the things we're talking about, I don't even have to think twice about it because it's now automatic. It's second nature to me. When I eat, I make a blessing before I don't even think about it. The food goes into my mouth. I don't have to well, which blessing is it? How do I do it? It's like much of my life is behaviorally adapted to my lifestyle. So how long does it take for a person to do that? They said on average, 66 days. Meaning when you take the whole gambit of a person who wants to know how to drink water every day, it takes 66, that one is actually less. That one, the bell curve would say, I think it takes about 21 days for a person to become habituated to drinking more water every day. But something like exercising for 30 minutes a day, something a little bit more difficult, took up to 2 months. But that's the mean, that's the range that you'll find. But the easy things like drinking a glass of water took about 21 days. So that's about 3 weeks. So this is a great idea. So now we can actually concretize what we're talking about. If there's ideas of implementations of behaviors that we want to do, we want to keep them small, we want to keep them consistent, and we want to keep them motivating us to grow, how long is it going to take us to implement those behaviors till it becomes second nature? If it's a small, easy behavior, it can be just as little as 3 weeks till we don't think about it. It'll be just as little as 3 weeks for us to have that same feeling that, wait, when I'm late in the morning and I'm rushing, I better brush my teeth. And it's not even a motivation. We just do it because it's part of our lifestyle. I don't even think about it. I don't know if people brush their teeth in the morning. Brush your teeth at night, right? Whatever it is. But you see, it's second nature. Okay, and now we're finishing with the following. Ready? Finishing? Okay, finishing. Great insight. It encompasses the whole talk in a scenario that happened with Rebbe Akiva. Rebbe Akiva was the ambassador of the, not the ambassador, he basically saved Judaism in the oral law because there was a terrible disease that was going and it killed 16,000 people died. 24,000. 24,000 of the greatest Torah scholars of that generation died out. He was left with basically, I think it was a handful of students left, and he transmitted the entirety of the oral tradition through those. Meaning we had a lot of it in written notes, in written text, but he was kind of the leader of the generation to kind of keep it going forward. The Talmud describes this man was actually a Baal Teshuvah. And the Talmud says, he quotes himself as saying, before I became more observant in my Judaism, whenever I would see a rabbi, says Rebbe Akiva, I used to want to bite him. And he says, I didn't want to just bite him, I wanted to bite him like a mule. So as Talmudic prose always goes, they ask, why did you want to bite him like a mule? So he says, because when a mule bites, it breaks the bone. So now you have this man who wants to kill and murder rabbis, and at the end of the spectrum, he becomes the ambassador of Torah and transmits what happened to this man in his life that you can have such a transition. And the Midrash tells us the scenario that happened. It tells us that one day he was traveling through, like a forest, and he sees a stream. And he comes to the stream and he sees it's dripping water on a huge rock. And he notices that this drips of water had dug a hole deep into this rock. Right? We've seen that in the natural. And he asked himself the following question. He says, this drips of water that are hitting this rock, right? How did they forge a hole? He says, if water can forge a hole in a rock, then the Torah can forge a hole in my heart, and I can go and now change my life. And he goes and he actually checks into a kindergarten and he starts learning the ABCs, Aleph Bet. He was much older. It says that he actually checked in with his kid in kindergarten, right? And he was 50 years old at the time. So asks the Gra, the Vilna Gaon, he says, what happened there? He saw like a big hole in a rock, and now all of a sudden he changed his life. I mean, we just saw the Grand Canyon, right? Are we like running? We'll take a picture of it, and then we'll talk about it at dinner. So there has to be some idea that he saw there that changed his life. Says the Vilna Gaon, he asked himself the following question. The first drop that hit that rock, I'll ask you this question. Did that first drop make an indentation in the rock or not? The very first drop. Quick answers. Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes? Anybody disagree? The first drop. Did that make a dent in the rock?
On a micro scale, a nano scale, absolutely.
Do you guys agree?
I agree.
You agree? Can you give me a proof?
Where's the rock?
I'll give you the best proof. Hands down proof. The first drop must have made a dent. Because if the first drop didn't make a dent, then the second drop also never made a dent, because then that would be effectively the first drop. So therefore, even the first drop made a dent. That motivated him. Because he said, even small change can make an indentation in a person's personality and behavioral system. When he saw that, that was a nugget. He took that with him and he says, I can check myself in to the kindergarten class and learn the ABCs, because even the smallest efforts will motivate change, as long as they are small drops and they are consistent drops. Thank you so much for listening, everybody.
5-minute break.